Well, happy Tuesday. It is Tuesday, July 20th in the year of 2021, and welcome to another edition of Tuesdays with Thom. Let's see. Congratulations are in order for a couple of our teammates on Tuesdays with Thom. The communicator, Emily Hedrick, our producer of Tuesdays with Thom, was recently elected Vice President of the American Business Women's Association. Congratulations, Emily. We hope that you all have a great year. There's my applause. Thank you, thank you. Okay, and congratulations are also in order for our roundtable guest, Michael Walker. In his other life, or maybe I should say in his main life, as owner of the Walker Insurance Agency, Michael is the Regional Vice President of the Southeast for the National Association of Health Underwriters. We'll hear more about that in our roundtable discussion. Congratulations to you, Michael Walker. And let's see, on August the 14th, speaking of the American Business Women's Association, they have asked me to speak at their women's conference, Women Empowerment Women's Symposium. It will be a virtual keynote, maybe the fourth one I've done since the pandemic started, and I'm looking forward to it. Later this fall, I'll be speaking to Sam Johnson's honors students class at Auburn University, and then later to Dr. Hebert's history class at Texas Tech University. So let's see, COVID is back, man, and it is raging across the country, especially among the unvaccinated. Let me say that again, especially among the unvaccinated. Los Angeles County will require residents to wear masks indoors, regardless of vaccination status, after an alarming rise in COVID cases. Data show the vast majority of new infections are among unvaccinated people. Say that again. Data shows the vast majority of new infections are among unvaccinated people. So it's probably better to listen to the medical professions than it is to listen to the politicians. Let's see. Speaking of politics, Alabama Governor Kay Ivey said there is no need for incentives to get people to take the COVID vaccine, even though the state of Alabama is dead last, in its percentage of its citizens being vaccinated. As they say, as the world turns. Let's see. Our G-List guest today is sponsored by Mainstream Financial Group. Mainstream Financial helps to bring financial vision and clarity to your retirement plans. So today, Mainstream Financial brings you my good friend, Dr. Ainsley Carey, who comes to us today all the way from one of the prettiest places I've ever been, Vancouver, British Columbia. Dr. Carey is the Vice President for Students at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. He will visit with us about his university experiences and his new book, Washington Next: Disputed Monuments, Honorees, and Symbols on College Campuses. It will be released on August the 2nd. We'll look forward to it. It should be very interesting, and we'll have an interesting discussion about it today. Now, Tuesdays with Thom, of course, is brought to you by our partners, the Best Girl Consulting Firm. Who and what is Best Girl? Well, let's listen and hear.
Best Girl is a consulting firm that provides customized leadership, access and inclusion, public relations, communications, and organizational consulting services. Clients include Fortune 500 companies, utilities, higher education institutions, small businesses, and associations. Best Girl's team of consultants, led by Joyce Gilly-Gossam, Emily Hedrick, and Sean Jones, partners with business and education clients to promote organizational effectiveness, communication, motivation, and leadership, with always an impact on the bottom line. Best Girl's customized consulting services include strategic planning, corporate communication, executive coaching, fundraising, and economic development.
Creates a solution that fits your needs. So let's get to our roundtable regulars and introduce them this morning. Barbara Wallace Edwards and Michael Walker. Barbara Wallace Edwards is a Mobile, Alabama native, currently living in Birmingham, and she knows everybody and a lot of people know her. And I've got a question for her this morning. I've got some people that called me yesterday and wanted to know about the image and likenesses for the players, and they wanted to know how they could get in touch with some of the players if they were interested in sponsoring them. And you know what I told them?
What
I
was that,
told them to
Thom?
call you. I said, call Barbara. She can probably help you. I don't know. Did I
I'm
send them to the
hoping.
right place?
I'm hoping I can help them. It depends on who they're looking for and how to get in touch with them, but maybe there's a possibility I can help them find who they're
They
looking
they
for.
they said they were looking for it's a nonprofit. They are looking for lesser known players on the team,
Okay.
players who probably won't get as much attention as some of the others, and they want to bring them into that, sponsor them in their organization, which is there to help kids. And
Definitely.
so maybe that would be something that would come about. And
Absolutely. That sounds like a wonderful idea, and I will be more than happy to assist them.
well, I will pass that along, and hopefully, you guys can do some good for them.
Okay.
Uh, let's get Michael Walker on here, and we'll come back and have a little discussion. Good morning, Michael Walker. Michael Walker is the president of the Walker Insurance Agency in Atlanta, Georgia. Actually, he's in more than Atlanta. He's in a couple of different places. Good morning, Michael. And let me say, it looks like we're having some internet trouble. So, Michael, you speak whenever you get ready, and I'll be quiet. Uh, uh,
Okay, good morning, Thom. Hope you're doing well. Good morning, Barbara. Hope you're doing well also. I'm happy to be with you. Yes, I think it's because of the weather here. We're having some storms and I may be having some difficulty, so please bear with me.
well, what we will do, hopefully you hear me, is when you start talking, we'll just stop and let you interject what you need to interject. So, right now, you've got the floor. If you hear me, then you take it away and tell us what's happening in your world.
Okay. Okay. Let me just start by saying what's happening in our world. Thom, in your opening monologue, you mentioned something about COVID is coming back. And we all knew that because of COVID, our lives would be different. Well, telemedicine, telehealth, that is continuing to move forward. And because of that, you're going to see a lot more things coming up. For instance, Amazon is expanding its telehealth entry into people beyond its employees. Microsoft acquired a company called Nuance Communication, which will complete and digitize a platform that will pull together doctor consultants and visits and put it all in one. And he sends you to another doctor, you have to fill out all the information all over again because the two doctors don't talk and the information doesn't go. Well, this right here will start to put it all in one place so you can go one place and get it. One thing of note, in addition to the what they call where you have Apple and different devices that are coming up that are monitoring your heart rate, they even have some that will determine if you are at risk for the virus. And they will isolate you, identify it, spread. One thing that's really interesting is something called tele ICUs, because the ICU units are the most expensive. And now what they're doing is putting together a platform where your doctors and your medical professionals can remotely monitor somebody that's in an ICU situation without having to be exposed to them if they have COVID. They can be back in another area and still have a line of sight and keep up with the patient. That's just a lot of things that's coming to the forefront because of COVID and telemedicine.
Okay, thank you, man. Any comments from you on that, Barbara?
Thom, I think those are wonderful ideas, and there's a lot of COVID news. And you mentioned Governor Ivey has already mentioned that there's no need for incentives here in Alabama, and Alabama's dead last in COVID vaccinations, and I think that's just unbelievable. But again, we're living in Alabama, so pray for us here. In addition, I'm sorry, go ahead, Thom.
Go ahead. No, and I think that's all about politics. I mean,
Absolutely.
she's running for office, and
Yes. Yeah,
the politicians on one side are telling people they ain't got to get vaccinated,
right.
and people believe it.
On another note, Thom, I was reading this morning in the news that Hollywood can now mandate vaccinations on sets. Um, and producers have the option to mandate or not in zone A, whatever zone A means. So I thought that was very interesting news too. So you may be aware of that already, but I think that's
They
great
have,
news.
when last I shot a job in May, and it was in Atlanta. And when I got to the hotel in Atlanta, within 15 minutes, a nurse met me and uh, gave me a COVID test. I'd been vaccinated,
Mhm.
and that test turned out negative. That was on Wednesday. On Friday, I was up to shoot,
Mhm.
and they gave me another test. They're very serious about it. You cannot work if you test positive. Um, and then they have zones, and the
Yes.
zones are, certain people are supposed to be in certain zones at certain times. And so normally where you have the big crew all together, that's been slimmed down, and you have just a few people working in certain areas, and that's where
Right.
those zones come from. The thing I shot was outdoors, and so we were able to have pretty much a full crew
Okay.
around, but everybody was masked up.
I think that's great.
Everybody.
You know, those great protocols to have in place. This thing is so serious, and especially with the Delta variant spreading like it has. And I understand that there has been the new variant, the Lambda variant, has been. There's been one case I know in Texas. So it continues to spread, and it's going to be more important to put in place those serious protocols.
I think one of the things that we'll see as this goes on, um, the weather's going to cool off in the fall.
Mhm.
It's going to certainly cool off in the winter, and so that's when the flu and all that stuff is more prevalent. And so I think we should be very careful at this time
Yes.
with, and I live in a tourist area, and we live away from the tourists. We live right in the middle of town, but it's just kind of secluded. And so I'm not aware sometimes of how many people are in town or what have you.
Right.
But the
Right.
supermarket is maybe a mile from our house. And so I started out to go to the supermarket the other day, and I got about halfway down there, and I just turned around and came back.
I
There were
can't
so
blame you.
many cars trying to find a shortcut to get over the bridge to get to Destin and the islands. It was absolutely incredible.
Wow.
And none of them are masked up, man. They're all the
Right.
tourists, and none of them are
Right.
masked up. And so I'm not. If they don't care about themselves, I don't. But I don't want them giving it to me or giving it to
Absolutely not.
somebody that I love or care
Right.
about.
Right.
So let me go back to Michael here. Michael, if you can hear me, I'm going to talk till you start talking. So we got quite a few people here saying good morning to us this morning, and good morning to all of you. Antley, Holly, Lori, Best Girl, Jose, my friend. We appreciate you guys being with us. So, Michael, you got any further comments, or can you hear me?
One other thing I'd like to mention is that a few weeks about the social health concern that people are experiencing due to COVID. Well, now employers are now getting in on the bandwagon. They now understand that they're in the public health business. And what I mean by that, they are now looking to do things like, you've heard of payday loans and stuff, where people go and get a payday loan, they go borrow money until their paycheck comes in, and then they have to pay a high interest
All right, 18%,
back. Well, now
21%.
some employers of figuring out that, especially during COVID, financial has social detriments to healthcare, and that brought on a host of other things. Well, now some employers in Kentucky, they have a program called Lead by Example, where employers now are looking at giving people an advance paycheck so that they don't have to go and do advance payday loans and pay the high interest rate. United Healthcare has a program, the analytical capabilities, where they are using data from their claims to tell employers what segment of their employee group that may be at risk for some social to their public health, such as maybe food or childcare or other things that can interfere. And primarily what they is that a lot of employers in the past would look at people that are below the poverty line and send them out to community health organization for additional help. However, people that are above that line, that may not be at the top of the pay scale, but more in the middle, they have some of the same issues. So now they are focusing on them through this program called Lead by Example in Kentucky, where employers are going to try and be, say, more compassionate than they were in the past. You know, Tom, when we came up with AT&T, and Barbara, you were in that same group, if you had some issue at home that was interfering, you had to leave it there and show up and work regardless. Okay.
Yes,
now
yes.
they are becoming more sensitive and more compassionate.
Yes, that's good.
I think one of the things that, in addition, that the COVID, I think the COVID has an effect beyond you just getting sick, and it's had a great impact on the employment world. I don't know if you guys saw it, but there was a Burger King in Lincoln, Nebraska, where everybody quit.
Yes.
And they put the sign up outside that we're all quit. Something like best of luck to you or something.
Right,
but they quit because the air conditioning didn't work. And as hot as it's been, the lunch shift calls for 8 people. They only had 4. So can you imagine you're running a Burger King with 4 people? You got one person at the counter, one in the window, one in the back cooking, and I don't know what the other one's doing. I guess they're just floating around making drinks or whatever.
Right.
And they had a really good manager. Everybody loves this manager. And she just said she couldn't do it anymore. I mean, it was just too much for them. And so they left and they posted the sign up on the big thing that they were gone, that they had all quit. Yes. And then they were making minimum wage.
Right.
And so, you can't really blame them.
That's true.
So
you're seeing a lot of, I was going to say, you're seeing a lot of changes. I received an email from a local restaurant here in Birmingham that said they were changing their hours because they can't find employees to work. So they're going to close like Monday through Wednesday. We only open from, 5 until 9, Wednesday through Friday, and then lunchtime on Saturdays and Sundays because they just can't find enough people to work the shift. And so that has been an issue for some employers, some companies. But some of that is due to the fact that they don't want to pay minimum wage even, or so it's going to be, like you said, it goes just beyond the health issues. There's a lot of impacts there.
So I've got a question for the both of you from my good friend Jose Garcia. And Jose says, when and which one of you, I guess he's talking about you and Michael, which one of you are going to take up to the skies and orbit the planet like Jeff Bezos and his company are doing or have done this morning?
I'm going to let Jeff and his family have that. I understand his brother went up on that with him, and they took an 18-year-old college student and, I think 2 other people with them. Yeah, I'm not interested in taking that flight.
Michael? Can you hear me? Go ahead, Barb.
I was going to say, what about you, Thom? Where
Oh,
you
I'm not
plan on
going.
going up?
Man, I'm nervous in airplanes. Shoot, so you don't have to worry about me going up there.
Yeah,
I have no intention of going into space at all.
yeah. No
Uh,
interest here either.
yeah, I didn't even watch it, to be honest with you.
No, I think they actually just took off like at 8 o'clock
Oh,
Central
they
this
did
morning.
another one today?
Yes,
Oh,
yes, there was
okay.
another one today. So yeah, that's going to be real interesting to see how that turns out.
So I heard they went to the edge of space and came back. Well, how do you know when you're on the edge of it?
Yeah, I don't know. Yeah, there's a lot to be learned from all
Yeah,
of this. I think
yeah.
some of it we don't really care to know, but I think they're going to learn a lot. It's going to be real interesting.
Okay, let's see. Michael, you got any comment before we move on?
I will just say I'm not going up. I'm going to stay right here on planet Earth.
Hey, Michael, I know you don't have anything to do with it, but it's kind of funny because you like one of those Italian movies. You know, it's like you start talking, but your mouth moves later, and so it's just interesting.
I'm feeling sorry for
It's
Michael.
an
I've been there,
internet.
Thom.
Yeah,
Yeah,
well, I
I've
know
been there
you
with those
know
internet
about it.
issues, so I really feel for Michael right now. It's not
Okay.
fun.
No, it's not. I know it's not. So anyway, I tell you what. Any closing comments from either one of you?
I was just at Tom, the Olympics are starting this week. There's a lot of changes going on with that as well. Protocols are in place supposedly for the athletes, and no spectators are allowed. And a lot of the top athletes are opting out of participating. So it's going to be interesting to even see how the Olympics turn out this year.
I think that it's tough. It's really hard on business. It's hard on schools. It's hard on everybody.
Yes.
But it is what it is, and rushing it, exposing people to the COVID is not going to move it along.
Not at
Actually,
all.
it's going to set it back. So
They should have canceled the Olympics this year. At least postponed it again.
yeah. Okay. All right. Well, let's move on. We will go on. Let's get to our G list guest. I'm anxious to have him on. We're the G list where everybody is a star. The G list is brought to you by Mainstream Financial Group. Mainstream Financial Group provides financial services for both individuals and businesses. Now, their mission is to understand the unique needs of each and every client and work closely with you, assembling a planning team to develop and manage your plan to help you accomplish your defined financial goals. Mainstream has financial professionals who will provide you with a complimentary, no obligation financial review. Their financial professionals can then offer the custom advice you need to mend together the pieces of your financial life, and they will come up with a plan that's truly comprehensive. Mainstream Financial assists retirees and near retirees in planning for a secure retirement so as not to run out of money during their lifetime. So you can take advantage of opportunities with tailored advice and the resources to act on that advice. Mainstream Financial Groups, dollars and sensible solutions. www.mainstreamfg.com, 205-324-0589. And now our G list for today. Remember, Hollywood's got the A list, and here on Tuesdays with Thom, we have the G list where everybody is a star. Our G list guest today is Dr. Ainsley Carey. Dr. Carey is the Vice President for Students at the University of British Columbia in Vancouver, Canada. He has 4 degrees and is a respected higher education administrator with more than 2 decades of service and leadership at universities like Southern Methodist University, the University of Arkansas, Temple University, Auburn University, and the University of Southern California. Welcome, Dr. Carey.
Thom, thank you so much for having me. It is such a pleasure to join Barbara, yourself, and Michael. So thanks for having me on today.
Well, we appreciate you being here with us. You've written a book, Washington Next, which I think will be released like August the 2nd, Disputed Monuments, Symbols, and Honorees on Campus. But before I get to the book, I wanted you and I to catch up just for a few minutes here.
Let's do it.
And you got 4 degrees under your belt. I got to ask you about this quote, because you and I used to talk about our past lives as athletes when we first met.
Yeah.
And you have a quote where you said, I went to college at the University of Florida to play football. And I say that very directly because that was my motivation. And then when I got to school, I fell in love with learning stuff. Talk about that for me.
Thom, I'm so glad you asked that question because it's so much about my journey right now. As you mentioned, I went to the University of Florida with, football on my mind. And just like every other 17, 18-year-old kid, I dreamed of an NFL career. And that's really why I went to school. So that motivation to play football drugged me into school. But boy, while I was there and I was taking very difficult and complicated classes, I suddenly realized that energy that I was investing in my sport, if I also invested that in the classroom, boy, what type of student could I be? And I started doing that. I started doing getting up early, meeting with the coach, studying after and before film or games. I started doing that in the classroom. And I started to realize if I invested myself in it, I could learn anything. I took some classes that I thought on day one, I was going to fail this class. I just knew I was going to fail. But I was so scared to fail that I focused and really worked hard and passed all of my classes and felt like, wow, there is something in this learning and engagement in classes that was really attractive to me. So by the time I reached my senior year in college, trying out for an NFL team or going to graduate school were real options for me. So I pursued the academic path, and my life has been more enhanced because I invested the same energy inside and outside the classroom. But I fell in love with the notion of having something that I didn't understand and then figuring it out.
Well, you fell in love with learning, and you've been to several universities now, as both as getting your education and as faculty. Arkansas, Temple, Auburn, University of Southern California, and now Vancouver. What's it like working in another country?
Yeah. Well, I'm proud to say that at many of those universities, even as an employee, I think one of the greatest benefits that a university has is that it allows employees to continue to take classes while they're enrolled. I think it's the most underutilized employee benefit. So while I was at Auburn, I earned an MBA and I went to Auburn's business school. And then when I went to the University of Southern California, I got enrolled in their master's degree in the law school and earned a master's in legal studies. So I would say to university employees that are listening, please take advantage of this benefit that the university gives you to take classes for sometimes free or very low cost. I have enjoyed, back to your question, I've enjoyed working on college campuses because it's so vibrant and young, and it's the next generation of political leaders, presidents, doctors, lawyers, clergy. And every day that I sit with a young person, I imagine that I'm sitting in front of a future Barack Obama or a future Michelle Obama or a future Oprah Winfrey or Tiger Woods or Cam Newton, right? Like I always imagine that this 18-year-old, has the entire world in front of them. So the conversation that I have with them right now, I want them to reflect 10 years later and say, you know what? I met with the vice president for student affairs. He helped me figure this out. So I always imagine that we are holding the future in our hand when we work on college campuses. And that's what excites me so much about my work.
That's great, man. That really is. So tell us about the book, Washington Next, Disputed Monuments, Symbols, and Honorees on Campus.
Yeah.
You examined the rapid rise of disputed memorials on campus between 2015 and 2020. So go ahead.
You know what, Thom, if you don't mind, I would like to comment on something that you and the host were talking about before I came on. Name, image, and likeness. So all of these things, COVID and name, image, and likeness have impact for what's going on university campuses. We are talking about this, especially COVID, all over the world right now, about how we bring students back to campus, because part of the college experience, the academic experience, is about being in classroom, being in community, being in dining facilities, being in a residence hall, going to athletic events. And for the past year plus, all of that has been interrupted by COVID. It's been difficult for us to bring students back and give them the experiences that universities are all about. So we are trying to reimagine the delivery of higher education in a new COVID environment. And these variants aren't helping us out at all, because we're wrapping our brain around, should we make vaccination mandatory for students on campus? How will that impact students? How will that impact faculty and staff? What about dining and living together? So all of those conversations are also happening on, universities are microcosms of the world. So we're bringing students from all over the world, all over the country, bringing them to one location and trying to provide an educational experience. So COVID is impacting how we think as well. And I'll close with a point on name, image, and likeness. As I mentioned to you before, I think we are in the wild, wild west on this. Imagine an 18-year-old is now negotiating a contract with a sponsor. These are contracts. This isn't your uncle lending you $500. This is a sponsor who expects performance from you. So now this 18-year-old has pressure to perform. And it's not that 18-year-olds haven't had pressure to perform before, right? There are a lot of people who, started playing professional tennis and golf at 15, 16, 17 years old. They have pressure to perform. We see the mental health challenges. We see the breakdown. We see sponsors withdrawing from certain athletes. I'm also concerned with the 18-year-old when it comes to issues of breach of contract. If this student athlete doesn't perform and that sponsor says, I'm no longer sending you that $500 a month, how does that impact the financial decision that they've previously made for their family, right? Because some of these kids will take that money and say, okay, this is going to help my mom pay for this car payment or this new mortgage, or I'm going to get a nice shiny apartment and a nice car. Suddenly my knee blows out and that sponsor says, okay, I'm done with you. So the student has a car that needs to be impounded, or their parents have to move out of the new apartment they just had. I just think we have entered a realm of college athletics that we cannot imagine the possibilities of what can go wrong. And many people have professional contracts, and we've seen what goes wrong with professional contracts. I am concerned for the mental health of the student athletes who are getting ready to sign on to deals that they haven't really thought out the long-term implications of.
Well, they haven't really thought out the long-term implications, but probably at this point in their lives, they're not capable of thinking out the long-term implications. So you have an 18-year-old sitting across from a 50-year-old lawyer who's been doing this for 30 years as part of his profession, and this kid is trying to negotiate with him. And you get a contract, you're going deep into that contract trying to figure out, because every word means something. Every contract is written in favor of the person drawing up the contract. And so these kids, I've always felt, and I'll get your opinion on this, I've always felt the kids should be paid some way. But I've always felt the university should pay them because they're employees of the university. They're not free agents. They're employees of that university. And I just feel like they've really thrown the kids under the bus with this. I mean, it sounds exciting if you're a kid, but at 18, oh man. And then I know, all right, let's say on the team I was on, okay, where did I fit in that pecking order of who was going to get what, because if, it's like, okay, I'm a starter for 3 years. So I should be getting so-and-so and so-and-so. He's an offensive tackle. He should be getting as much as I'm getting.
Exactly.
And so they've just opened up Pandora's box, man.
Oh yeah, we're about to really see the haves and the have-nots. And I strongly believe student athletes will start making decisions about which institutions to go to based on which alumni and donor base will give them the most money. Why would I not go to Oklahoma if they're going to offer me $1,500 a month versus, LSU, who's only offering me $1,000 a month? And then here comes Texas, they're going to do $2,000 a month. So I'm going there, right? Because there's no one regulating how much I'm going to get paid. So let me get the biggest contract when I can and go to that school. I think it just completely changes the game. And back to your point, this was the universities and the NCAA responsibility. They're making 11 to 12 billion dollars a year off NCAA basketball, and they could have easily created a stipend to pay these student athletes, just like you said, as employees. Pay them for 20 hours a week, 30 hours a week, whatever the number is, but they could have paid them at the university level. Instead, the NCAA got lazy and greedy, and they could have solved this problem before it went to where we are right now. I suspect in 5 to 10 years, this is going to be reversed, and the universities are going to finally step up and say, we should be paying these students and get the corporations out of our student athletes' pockets.
I agree. And, you know, you mentioned, okay, kid decides he wants to go to Oklahoma or LSU or Texas or whatever. But with the transfer portal and now with the incentive of money, what's the stop? He goes to Oklahoma and he said, no, you know, I think I want to go to LSU. They've offered me more money. And so he transfers to LSU and he can play right away. He's a free agent. It's like the NFL. You know, and so they always said they didn't want to pay the kids because it would be too much like professional, but the system they've set up makes them professional.
Exactly.
And I do think it's going to be adjusted, but I do think that the colleges are going to have to step up. I mean, yes. They're going to have to do something for the kids.
Yeah, this is just going to be a mental health impact that we have not yet imagined. But Thom, let me get to the question at hand that you asked. Again,
and then we'll get to Marvin Michael. Go ahead.
Yes, I appreciate you giving me this opportunity to talk about my book, Washington Next, with a question mark. And the question is George Washington next? As we've seen in 2015, there was this instant rise in disputed memorials, not just on campus, but throughout the United States. And some of the sparks to this is the first spark, but one of the sparks was the Charleston Church Massacre, where a gunman walked into a church, a Bible study on a Wednesday night and killed 9 parishioners in Charleston, South Carolina. The next day, they captured the gunman and found his Facebook site included a Confederate flag and a .45 Glock millimeter, and he went to jail. But within about 2 weeks, the state of South Carolina removed the Confederate flag from the State House dome, from the Capitol dome, and that had been a 4-decade debate in South Carolina about the appropriate placement of the Confederate flag. Many throughout the state recognize the Confederate flag as the flag of the Confederate Army, the army that went to war with the United States, the Civil War with the United States, in an effort to retain slavery in the South. So that monument was removed, that symbol was removed. 2 years later, there was a Charleston riot in Charleston, South Carolina, where protesters and counter-protesters were there to dispute the removal of a monument to Robert E. Lee. Robert E. Lee, of course, is the Confederate general of the Confederate Army, and there was a proposal to remove that monument. But self-proclaimed white nationalist rammed his car into a crowd, killing one counter-protester and injuring 19 others. Within a few days, a number of people responded, including the president of the United States at the time, who was Donald Trump. And he responded by protecting good people on both sides, protecting those who were there to fight for Confederate monuments. But he raised this question: what is George Washington next? Is Thomas Jefferson next? A number of historians have stepped in and said, time out. You cannot compare those who fought to defend slavery to the founders of the country. Those are 2 different generations of men operating under 2 separate purposes. But the question he was asking is, where do we draw the line as monuments and memorials are being removed? The Southern Poverty Law Center indicates about 1,800 memorials to Confederate and Ku Klux Klan members throughout the United States, the majority of them in the 11 Confederate states. They indicated that those memorials were being removed at a rapid rate throughout the country. A couple hundred have been removed since 2017. So what I wanted to understand is, what does this mean for a college campus where there are a couple hundred Confederate memorials on campus? Is campus the right place to do this? And would we ever get to a future generation that considers George Washington owned slaves, Thomas Jefferson owned slaves? And they didn't own 10 slaves. They owned hundreds. Thomas Jefferson owned 600 slaves. George Washington owned 150 slaves while they were serving as president. Might a future generation say, that's immoral and inappropriate, and we don't want to recognize that anymore? So the focus of this book was really for me to pose that question, but really to look at how universities responded to Confederate memorials on campus, and what are the patterns and themes to help universities think this challenge through about how they respond to George Washington, Robert E. Lee, Nathan Bedford Forrest, other Confederate and Ku Klux Klan members whose names are on buildings at Auburn and Alabama and Mississippi. You name a Southeastern Conference school, and a building is named after not only a Confederate leader, but a Ku Klux Klan leader in many Southern schools and schools throughout the country. So my work is to examine, how should universities think about this?
And what conclusions did you come to?
Yeah, so thanks for bringing this up. So as I mentioned, I wanted to focus on campus because universities are places that invite diversity. We say to faculty, staff, students from all over the globe, come to our university because we're diverse. When you look at the university's website, you see people of color. When you look at the faculty, they promote minority scholarships and everything else. So we create this impression, or we purport to create this space of diversity, equity, and inclusion. Yet a building named after a Confederate leader or a Ku Klux Klan monument does not communicate welcome, inclusive environments. So I studied 25 universities who responded to disputes, protests on campus. Universities like Stanford, Yale, Princeton, Michigan, Florida State University, Indiana University, the University of Oregon, the University of Texas, Bowling Green State University. So about 25 universities had protests on campus. Many more had protests on campus, but these universities conducted a review of their monuments or memorials and wrote a public report. That is key, that the reports of what these universities found were public. In this, there were 56 memorials being disputed. Confederate memorials, Ku Klux Klan memorials, memorials to segregationists, memorials to those who believed in eugenics and supported eugenics, memorials to honorees who were involved in lynching and massacres throughout the United States. There were 56 of those debated on college campuses. 22 of them were retained. The university said, we're not going to remove it. We're going to keep it, but we're going to add a plaque. We're going to add a display. We're going to explain it more. Let me give you an example. Clemson University, Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman was the governor of the state and a senator that represented Clemson University. Tillman is the name of Tillman Hall at Clemson, one of the most iconic buildings on campus. It's a beautiful building. It reminds you of Stanford Hall at Auburn. It's a beautiful building on campus, but it's named after a former governor who was involved in massacres to prevent Black people from voting in the 1876 election. So a strong part of the Ku Klux Klan efforts to suppress votes in the 1800s, the late 1800s, was to conduct lynchings and massacres throughout the South. And Tillman bragged about his participation in lynching and massacres. And in 1981, well after Tillman's legacy was well known, Clemson University named Tillman Hall after Benjamin Pitchfork Tillman. So 22 universities retained their name, and Clemson was one of them. They added a plaque to describe what was going on, but they retained his name on that building. 25 universities removed their memorial, whether it's a monument, a statue, or a symbol, it was removed. And 8 universities relocated it, moved it to a museum or some other place. University of Texas had 6 Confederate monuments on campus. They moved them to museums and other locations on campus. But there was a long thoroughfare at Texas that had 6 monuments that aligned the thoroughfare, and they moved them on campus. Now, these individuals are not accused of saying insensitive things. What I found in my research, out of the 56 memorials, there were those who were involved in colonization. meaning removing indigenous people from their land. And that was the story of the colonies moving west. The Trail of Tears, where the Seminole Indian tribes got up from Georgia and Florida and had to walk to Oklahoma. Thousands of indigenous people died in colonization. They also had something called the doctrine of discovery, meaning if you had land, Thom, and someone walked into your property and said, you know what, I have discovered this land, and they put a flag and they build a small fort, you have to now move, because according to the doctrine of discovery, they have discovered your property. And as an indigenous person, as a Native American, you didn't have the rights to own property. So anyone could come and remove you from that land. So the doctrine of discovery is embedded into law. And many of the names of honorees on college campuses actually dispossess indigenous people of their land. Some of the names on campus include slave owners, members of the Confederacy, segregationists, members of the Klan, those who were involved in eugenics, and as I mentioned, those who were involved in massacres and lynching. You may have recently seen the Tulsa massacre featured on CNN recently. Some of those, there were dozens of massacres exactly like the Tulsa one, where hundreds of Black people were murdered in a single incident, most of it around voter suppression. That was the primary focus of massacres in the late 1800s. So these are the allegations waged against the 56 memorials that I referenced. Here's what I found, that universities have a path to resolve these by looking at these four critical components. One, what is the principal legacy of the honoree that we're discussing? As you can imagine, any individual has a long list of good deeds and bad deeds. Was the incident a single incident, or is the incident a core part of their legacy, of who they are? Many people will make mistakes throughout their lives and throughout their careers, but is the incident their principal legacy? Is this really what they're known for? Or was the incident incidental to their life? A mistake, an accident, a youthful indiscretion. So what is their principal legacy is the first question. And then we go into what Southern states call heritage protection acts. In 8 out of the 11 former Confederate states, they have established what they call heritage protection acts to specifically protect Confederate war memorials. Although in legislation it says, we're protecting all U.S. wars, the focus is really Confederate war memorials. In the state of Alabama, there's a Heritage Protection Act that focuses on protecting Confederate memorials that are older than 40 years old. So that's where they drew the line in Alabama. If the memorial is older than 40 years old, essentially you can't touch it. And, as you mentioned, in Birmingham, the mayor of Birmingham put up a plaque and boxed off a memorial, and then he eventually had it removed. But boy, they got sued by the state and they went to court and they fought it, and lots has to happen in order for a Confederate memorial or a Ku Klux Klan memorial to be removed in 11 Confederate states. But the question here is, what is preservation? What deserves to be preserved? As human beings, we value what are the things we want to protect and we want to preserve for memory's sakes. Heritage protection is trying to preserve something. So we have to ask ourselves as a society, what's important to be preserved? Everything shouldn't be erased or trashed or thrown away, but what are the things that we should preserve? The third category that universities have to talk through is landscape fairness. When we create a campus community and we invite students from all different ethnic and cultural backgrounds, and then we put a statue of a Confederate leader in the center of that campus, we have just disinvited thousands of students that we've asked to come to our campus. I think the most obvious example I could give that people respond to and understand immediately, if we were in New York City or some northeastern city, and we put up a statue to Osama bin Laden on a college campus, that would be offensive, repulsive, and everyone would ask for that to be removed. Yet, we put up statues to Robert E. Lee, Nathan Bedford Forrest, and other Confederate leaders on Southern college campuses and ask Black students to deal with it, get used to it. This is part of our history. This is part of our legacy. If we put up a statue to Adolf Hitler anywhere in the United States, everyone would be offended and demand that it's removed. Yet we ask students of color to come to our campuses, and universities defend Confederate and Ku Klux Klan memorials. So there's an issue about landscape fairness. When we put up these images, it creates an impact on individuals. It continues the trauma and the legacy of whatever that individual stood for. And the last one that I'll mention is universities have to consider what are the moral standards that should be used to measure this decision. As you know, there were a set of moral standards that existed in the 1850s. And then those moral standards changed by the 1950s. So which moral standards should help us judge how we make decisions about memorials? For example, in the 1800s, slavery was common, especially in the South. Many white Southerners, white farm owners owned slaves. In the North, it was not as common. But by the late 1800s, slavery was illegal in the United States. But then segregation, Jim Crow stepped in, convict leasing stepped in, sharecropping stepped in to be kind of a de facto form of slavery in the future. Today, we understand slavery as immoral and unethical and abhorrent. But in the 1850s, people owned slaves. People owned hundreds of slaves. Should we judge that prior generation by our standards today is the question. So I think many universities are struggling with which moral standard should we use, yesterday's or today's. My position on this is that they should consider both, because although slavery was common in the 1850s, it was still immoral. There were many people, half the United States, objected to slavery at that time and continue to object to it today. So the question is, how do we evaluate that memorial today? Past standards, future standards, today's standards, or both? So the four frames that I believe a university has to use: principle, legacy, what do we preserve in the heritage protection? How do we think about landscape fairness, and which moral standards should be used?
Okay. I got a couple questions, but let Barbara and Michael ask the questions, and I'll close out. So Barbara, you got a question?
I do. Dr. Carey, thank you for being with us today. My God, I can't wait for your book to come out now, because you've got me so interested in reading this.
Where do you get the book? Let's talk. Where do you get the book, Dr. Carey?
So I shared it with Emily. Emily has a link to the book. It's on Amazon. You can get it as a Kindle read, or you can purchase the book directly through Amazon. And I believe Emily is going to share that link with our viewers today.
Okay.
But it's Washington Next through Amazon.
Yes.
Okay.
And the things that you talk about are so important. And I know, like at Auburn University, they have been pushback from the faculty, staff, the students about the naming of several buildings on campus there. The president has set up a task force there to look at all of these the names of the buildings and what should be changed. And as of yet, I don't think any of the building names have been changed. They've instead chosen to name 3 of the buildings after 3 African American alums at Auburn University, or people who have been in positions at Auburn. So what are your thoughts on that? If the university is not going to change, do you think that's going to answer or fill the needs or the feelings of all these people who are against that, just by naming other buildings after African American alums and people who are important in the African American community?
Yeah, Barbara, thanks for that question. That's such an important question that I didn't include in my comments, because that's called the counter monument movement. So Bibb Graves Amphitheater at Auburn, for example, is named after a former governor that was sponsored by the Ku Klux Klan. Right, the Ku Klux Klan endorsed him and advanced him through the political process. We also know Alabama's former 3-time governor, George Wallace, was also the governor that stood at the schoolhouse door at the University of Alabama. It says segregation now, segregation forever. And we have Wallace Hall at Auburn University, named after Governor George Wallace. So And I'm reminded that Governor Wallace was elected 3 times, and he received overwhelming support from the Black community at the time. So how do we evaluate Governor George Wallace? So some universities have, as you mentioned, used what they call the counter memorial approach. They've added memorials to other famous alum of that university. I think the best example is the University of Texas. They put up 6 memorials to counter their Confederate memorials on campus. They have a memorial of Martin Luther King. They put up their Heisman Trophy winners, Ricky Williams, and I can't remember the other. I can't remember the other Heisman Trophy winner from.
I think it was Earl Campbell.
Earl Campbell and
Yes.
Barbara Jordan, first Black senator from Texas, and Cesar Chavez, memorials to them on campus. So they did that in the early 2000s, thinking this is going to end the protests for the 6 Confederate memorials we have on campus. It didn't. In 2015, students erupted again and said, this remains inappropriate. It remains inappropriate to have Robert E. Lee, the Confederate general, Jefferson Davis, the president of the Confederacy, and Woodrow Wilson, the United States president, who was a strong segregationist and white supremacist. The students said this remains inappropriate to have these monuments on our campus. And since then, the University of Texas removed them after the 2017 riot in Charlottesville, Virginia. So what happens? Incidents happen in the world. George Floyd, for example, that open our eyes to the inappropriateness of memorials that offend communities. After George Floyd, the Washington Redskins changed their name with a realization that this is offensive. NASCAR stopped using the Confederate flag with the realization this remains offensive. Thom might remember when the University of Mississippi stopped waving the Confederate flag in the late 90s, when other coaches at other schools started saying, why would I be a Black recruit and go to the University of Mississippi? And they run around with the Confederate flag. That changed. The flag came down at the University of Mississippi. So counter monuments do not work in the long run. Naming the Student Center after Harold Milton will not mitigate the challenges of Bibb Graves and George Wallace Hall. And there are about six halls at Auburn that have names associated with either the Klan or the Confederacy. That task force has to dig deep into considering the memorials and the principal legacy of each of those individuals, because it will not go away until it's responded to. And all we need is another George Floyd incident for another group of students to demand a change. And the faculty remain there, and the faculty will continue to demand a change. So counter monuments do not work. The other thing that's very popular is contextualization. Let's put a plaque or a sign next to Wallace Hall explaining Wallace's legacy. Well, you know that plaque, no one's going to read it. It's about this big, and it includes about 40 words, right? It isn't enough to describe who George Wallace was to make people feel comfortable. So this is an effort to respond to offensive memorials by saying, let's educate the community. The community doesn't know who George Wallace was. So by putting this plaque, we now educate the community and they won't be offended anymore. That's not true. So it's going to last a very short period of time. Demands for its removal will continue.
Thank you.
Michael? Still having issues, it looks like.
I will ask a question. Ansley, thanks for being with us. So very informative. You have been to a lot of different universities. So tell me, decide to stay at university, what are some of the things you evaluate and you look for in a university before you join?
Thanks. That's such a good question. And it's something that I do talk to young professionals about as we make our journey in the profession and we decide to move. So when I was 25, I had a set of criteria that I used. And now that I'm 50, I have a set of criteria that I use, right? So when I was younger, I was looking for career opportunity, promotion, more responsibilities in my professional role. I was really looking for things that would feed Ainsley and things that would help me propel my career towards becoming a college president. So where are the places that will help me do that? Institutional reputation, institutional brand, scope of responsibilities, also finances. How much was I going to be compensated in this role? And region of the country was important to me. I was not a fan of anything north of the Mason-Dixon line where it got too cold, right? I'm a Southern boy by heart, so I really enjoy kind of Southern universities, and those were my criteria in kind of my younger days. As I've grown older and have a family that I also have to do the calculus of what works for them, I'm really thinking about what works for my family, which region of the country, what are the experiences? Like coming to Canada is an experience for my 14-year-old daughter. I want her to feel like an international citizen. I want her to have 2 passports. I want her to have citizenship in multiple countries. I want her to feel comfortable traveling the world as she grows older. I would love for her to learn another language so that she can understand people around the world and be a global citizen. So the move to University of British Columbia was largely about my interest in kind of exploring the country and moving out of the United States and doing something different. It's a tremendous career opportunity because the portfolio that I oversee at the University of British Columbia is massive. In the US, it would be 3 vice presidents holding this role because I work with all athletic teams, housing, dining, all of the revenue functions of the university, and everything that the dean of students would work with, all of the student engagement, student rapport, student challenges and opportunities. So I really look for what's in the best interest of my family and what helps propel my professional career and what's a great experience. And in each of those places, that all of the universities I've been, University of Arkansas, Temple, Auburn, University of Southern California, and now University of British Columbia, my family and I have been there 5 to 7 years, experienced a lot. I'd be glad to stay longer, but we always find another opportunity to do something larger and have a different family experience. So that's how I evaluate those decisions at this stage in my life.
Let me ask you this question before you leave us. And when we used to talk, I think when you were at Auburn, we hung out a good little bit. At that time, you had presidential aspirations of being president of a university or a college at some point. Is that still something you're looking forward to? Is that on your radar?
Most definitely. That remains on my radar. That is definitely something that I have, in fact, stayed in touch with President Gouge. He's been an incredible mentor to me in this space, lending advice, nominating me for positions from time to time. But college presidency is definitely something that I am interested in. It remains kind of my top interests after serving as vice president at 3 universities over the past 10 years. I'm very interested in stepping into a college presidency. I am also growing more interested in the scholarship of the university. So this book, Washington Next, is my step into the academy, especially on the academic side of the academy. I think as a president, it's important that I am contributing to the literature and I understand the demands of the faculty, but also as a citizen and as a man of color in the United States, I feel it's important that I am contributing critical thought to issues that concern people of color. And this is a matter that concerns people of all colors. How do we memorialize spaces on our campuses and then welcome students? And I think in a post-COVID world, when students return to campus, these issues will not go away until Auburn and Florida and Texas and Alabama and everyone responds. The University of Alabama also has a task force that's looking at memorials on campus as well. I think the entire state of Alabama will be looking at this pretty soon. So I am hoping that my work will provide some guidance on how to think about it.
And the book is available at Amazon for all of you out there. There's a couple of people who have asked. There's a couple of people who say they've already ordered it. So they're just waiting. And
Thank you.
you've been nominated by Vernell Razor says you will be a college president, and my good friend Antley Lamont State. Antley says come to South Carolina and be the president of the University of South Carolina. So you already got a job just by being on the
show. I would gladly take on that challenge if invited to do so.
Anybody got any final comments for Ainsley? Barbara, Michael, either one of you?
I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. This has been a wonderful show. Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead, Michael.
Go ahead. I just wanted to say thank you for joining us. It was very informative. I appreciate it.
Barbara?
Thom,
likewise.
Thanks. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was just going to say thank you so much. This has been a wonderful show. I've enjoyed and learned a lot from you today, so thank you.
And I want to just make one little final comment about the statues and the monuments. One of the things we've heard is, and you know, I work with development at Auburn and we raised a lot of money, is that the people who give the big money won't give if you take the monuments down. Is that something that's prevalent on other campuses as well?
Yeah, so that's one of the issues that universities face. Right? So many universities are very dependent on fundraising, especially as state funding goes south. Universities receive less and less money from state funding. They depend more heavily on tuition and donations to make these things happen. So there are some alumni bases that will say, if you remove this statue of Robert E. Lee or name your Confederate leader, we will give less money. And sometimes that's true and sometimes that's not true. And Thom, you know, they'll say, if you fire this coach, we're going to give less money. Or if you don't fire this coach, we're going to give less money. So it is not uncommon that donors threaten to withdraw gifts for university decisions that they don't like. And those decisions include monuments, coaches, presidents, faculty, buildings. I mean, you name it. There are donors who will withdraw or threaten to withdraw funding based on a university decision that they are opposed to. Now, I would question or have concerns about the university that would maintain a memorial to a segregationist, a eugenicist, a person who is, you know, proven to be involved in lynching or massacres, or a person who's proven to be involved in genocide, and the university would retain that building name for $1 million, right? Like, what's your price now? I do think it becomes a point where university has to say, what are our moral standards? And what do we tell our students, faculty, and staff we stand for? And if we're willing to maintain a building to a Confederate leader because someone offered to withdraw $1 million, that says a lot about who we are as a university and we are as a community and what we think about equity, diversity, and inclusion. I think it throws your entire EDI movement out the window when you accept these things for cash.
Yes.
Well, man, thank you so much. I've enjoyed it so much. You know, it's always good to see you and to hang out with you. And I saw some of our leadership former students the other day, and they still stay in touch with me. And I think that was 2012 when we did that.
Yes, it was. Yes, it was.
Yeah, so we're still in touch. And it's been great. So I just want to thank you so much. It's been very informative. Once your book comes out and you're starting on your next one or whatever, we'd like to have you back on sometime and just talk with us. And I got to come back to Vancouver. You know, I hadn't been so I had to talk to my wife and see if we can go up to Vancouver. So nice. I loved it up there.
Would love to have you. And the next one, the next book is about massive resistance, the lack of equity, diversity, and inclusion on college campuses. You might remember the symbol of Governor Wallace standing in front of Alabama saying segregation now, segregation forever. Well, when the Supreme Court ruled that universities and schools should be segregated, many Southern governors got together and said, let's resist this. That resistance continues today. in the lack of diversity that we see on college campuses is because of the legacy of massive resistance. It's still in place. SATs were born out of stopping Black kids from going to white schools, and SATs are still in place.
Yeah.
SATs were a form of eugenics. Eugenics is the belief that some people are fit to have children and reproduce, and some people are not. How do we find out who's fit and who's not fit? We need a standardized test. So tests were born to keep Black students out of predominantly white institutions, and massive resistance continues today. So in the next book, we're examining massive resistance and its explanation for why universities remain or continue to have a lack of diversity.
Man, that's great. Thank you, Ainsley.
Well, thanks
we
again,
appreciate
Thom.
it
It's
very
been a
much.
pleasure.
Thank you, man. That's our show for today. Our upcoming G-List guests on Tuesdays with Thom include David Housel, Athletic Director Emeritus at Auburn, Fry Gallard, Writer in Residence at the University of South Alabama, Gayla Ford, an educator in North Alabama. And so we want to thank our sponsors, Best Girl Inc. and Mainstream Financial Group. You know somebody who you think would make a great guest, please refer them to us at either Thom at Best Girl or Emily at bestgirl.com. I want to thank Emily Hedrick, the communicator, and say congratulations to her again. Thanks, Sean Jones, the organizer. Remember, enjoy yourself. Make every day count. Stay safe.